decided to prank him on New Year's, but he didn't let it go and did this. Hello, Reddit. This is my first time posting, and I'm using a throwaway account because I really don't want this tied to my main. Honestly, I'm not even sure why I'm here. Maybe I'm looking for support or clarity, or maybe I just want to get it all off my chest. Whatever the case, here I am, spilling my guts to a bunch of strangers on the internet. So, let me introduce myself. My name is Amelia, and for the sake of anonymity, let's call my ex-boyfriend Tom. Tom and I were together for about 5 years, and it was amazing. Until it wasn't. Bye-bye. Now, the thing about me is that I've always been a bit of a prankster. No, scratch that. I've always been a huge prankster. It's just part of who I am, or at least it used to be. There's something about pulling off a well-planned prank that feels good. Of course, Tom was no exception to this side of me. In fact, he was my favorite target. When we first started dating, my pranks were pretty harmless. Cute, even. I'd do things like hide sticky notes with silly messages all over his apartment, or switch his coffee to decaf without telling him, just to see if he noticed. He'd roll his eyes and give me this little smirk that I absolutely lived for. But here's the thing. Tom wasn't, and I guess still isn't, a huge fan of pranks. It's not that he hated them outright, at least not at first, but I could tell they weren't exactly his favorite thing. He's the kind of guy who values order and predictability, while I thrive on chaos. In the beginning, though, he didn't complain. I think he saw it as one of my quirks, something that came with the package of dating me. And since my pranks were relatively harmless back then, he just went along with it. He'd laugh it off, or give me a playful lecture about how I was going to give him a heart attack one day. I thought it was all part of the fun. I thought it was our thing. In hindsight, I think he was just tolerating them because he loved me, not because he genuinely enjoyed being the butt of my jokes. But at the time, I didn't notice that nuance. To me, it was just fun and games, and since he wasn't outright complaining, I thought everything was fine. Things started to take a different turn when someone, a friend of mine actually, casually suggested that I try vlogging or starting a couple's account. She said that I would totally blow up on social media with the kind of stuff I did. I remember laughing it off at first, saying that I wasn't the content creating type, and it was true. I wasn't really into the idea of putting myself out there like that. I didn't even post on my personal social media that often, so the thought of creating content seemed overwhelming and, frankly, out of character for me. But then life threw me a curveball. I got laid off from my job. It wasn't personal or anything. They were doing company-wide cutbacks, and I was part of a large group that got let go. Still, it hit me hard. And even though I was actively searching for a new job, the process was slow and discouraging. I had too much time on my hands and too much anxiety weighing me down. And that's when I started spending more and more time on social media. At first, it was just a way to pass the time, but the more I scrolled, the more I found myself sucked into this world of couples accounts, prank videos, and viral challenges. I'd see these couples pulling pranks on each other and racking up millions of views. It was like a whole new world I hadn't paid much attention to before. I realized that what they were doing was what I usually did to Tom. The only difference was that they were recording it, editing it, and sharing it with the world. And they were getting paid for it. That part especially stuck with me. Some of these accounts had sponsorships, ads, and merchandise lines. They'd turn their pranks and antics into actual careers. At first, the idea seemed far-fetched. I wasn't a content creator, and I didn't have any experience with editing or building an audience. But the more I thought about it, the more tempting it became, especially because I was unemployed at the time. I was already struggling to find a new job, and the thought of going viral and potentially never having to work a regular job again was like a siren song. I started to daydream about it. What if I could make this work? What if our page blew up? I wouldn't have to spend hours tweaking my resume or sitting through awkward interviews. I could be my own boss, doing something I already enjoyed. It seemed like a win-win. It honestly seemed like such a good idea at the time. I mean, what could go wrong, right? I had a knack for pranking. Social media was booming with content like this, and people were making a living off it. It felt like the stars were aligning for me to try something new. One day, while we were sitting on the couch after dinner, I casually brought it up to Tom. I didn't want to overwhelm him or make it seem like I was forcing him into something, so I tried to frame it as a fun idea. He gave me a look, the kind of look that said he wasn't really into the idea, but didn't want to start an argument. He shrugged and told me that he wasn't really into it, but I could do whatever I wanted as long as I kept him out of it. At first, I felt a little deflated. I had hoped he'd be more excited about the idea, maybe even want to join in and make it a team effort. But then I realized he hadn't outright said no. He hadn't told me to stop or discouraged me. In my mind, that was enough to move forward. And with that, I decided to dive in headfirst. I spent the next few days researching everything I needed to know about starting a content channel. I watched endless tutorials on filming, editing, and building an audience. I scoured the internet for affordable equipment, ring lights, a decent camera, a tripod. I even treated myself to a beginner-friendly video editing software. It was a lot of prep work, but I was determined to make it happen. I figured if I was going to do this, I'd do it right. After setting everything up, I started small with a few harmless videos. Nothing too crazy, just little pranks that I thought would make people laugh but wouldn't push Tom too far. For example, one of my first videos was a classic fake spider in the bathroom prank. I filmed myself carefully placing a rubber spider on the toilet seat, then waited with my phone in hand as Tom went in. His reaction was priceless. He jumped back, let out a startled, "What the hell?" and then laughed when he realized it wasn't real. It was perfect, short, funny, and harmless. I edited the clip, added some background music, and uploaded it to my new account. I didn't expect much, but to my surprise, it actually got a decent number of views. A few people even commented. That little bit of feedback was all the encouragement I needed. I felt like I was onto something. The next prank was a simple, switching sugar for salt in his coffee video. Again, harmless, but funny. Tom gave me his usual annoyed but amused reaction, and I made sure to cut the video before he could say anything too grumpy. At first, it was exciting, like genuinely amazing. I loved it. I mean, here I was creating content, putting myself out there, and getting attention for something I enjoyed doing. It felt good, really good. And honestly, I started to think that maybe this could actually work. Like maybe I could turn this little side thing into something big. I mean, why not? People did it all the time, right? They started small, worked their way up, and then, boom, they were influencers. I was convinced I could do it too. So I kept at it. I kept recording pranks, editing videos, and posting them. At first, I was thrilled with the response. I got a few comments here and there, a couple of likes, and what I considered a decent number of views. But then, I started wanting more. Because, let's be real, a decent number of views wasn't going to cut it if I wanted to go viral. And that's what I really wanted. I wanted those millions of views, the flood of comments, the subscribers pouring in. I wanted the kind of success that would make me a full-time content creator, the kind where I wouldn't have to stress about finding a new job or paying bills. I wanted to achieve the daydreams I'd started building in my head about this whole thing. And that's when it hit me. If I wanted more attention, I needed to do more. The harmless little pranks I had been doing were cute, sure, but they weren't the kind of thing people were going to talk about or share with their friends. They weren't viral material. So I started slowly upping the pranks. Nothing crazy at first, just little things to get a bigger reaction out of Tom. Like I did one where I pretended to lose his keys. He laughed a bit, but I could tell he was starting to get mildly annoyed. Still, I didn't think much of it because, well, it was all in good fun, right? But even with those slightly bigger pranks, I wasn't seeing the numbers I wanted. The views were still decent, but that was it. Decent wasn't enough anymore. I wanted those big viral numbers, the kind that would make my videos blow up overnight. And that's when I decided to push things a little further. I started planning pranks that were more elaborate and honestly a little riskier. Like I did one where I pretended the Wi-Fi was out for an entire day, knowing full well how much Tom relies on it for work. He was frustrated, but when I told him it was a prank, he just shook his head and walked away. Another time, I set up a fake accident where I spilled juice all over his favorite shirt. He was annoyed, but again, I thought it was harmless. Looking back, I probably should have noticed the signs. Tom's reactions were becoming less amused and more tired. But at the time, I didn't see it, or maybe I just didn't want to see it. I was so caught up in chasing this idea of success that I ignored the little cracks that were starting to form. Because here's the thing about trying to go viral. It's addicting. Once you start thinking about it, it's hard to stop. You get this tunnel vision where all you can focus on is, how do I make this bigger? How do I make this better? How do I get more people to watch? And that's exactly where I was. I did a couple more elaborate and honestly much riskier pranks. One that really stands out and makes me cringe the most in hindsight was when I called Tom during an important business meeting to tell him the house had burned down. I even went as far as sending him a fake photo of a burnt-out house that I found online. He panicked and canceled his meeting on the spot, rushing home to make sure I was okay and to see the supposed damage. Of course, when he got home and saw everything was fine, he was furious. And rightfully so. I mean, who does that? But at the time, I brushed it off. I apologized and told him it was just a joke. In my mind, it was harmless because no real damage had been done, right? He just looked at me, shook his head, and muttered something about how I needed to stop. I didn't listen, though. Even with all those elaborate pranks, though, the views were still just decent. They weren't bad, but they also weren't anywhere near the viral sensation I was hoping for. My videos were getting a few thousand views here and there, but nothing that would make me an internet star or turn me into a full-time content creator. And that's when I knew I had to push things further. Yes, I know now that it was stupid, so stupid, but at the time I kept telling myself just one big hit, one viral video, and this will all be worth it. Then New Year's Eve rolled around. I first got the idea from TikTok. I was scrolling through my feed and came across this couple who had done a prank. It wasn't exactly like what I ended up doing, but it sparked something in my head. In their video, they had set up this elaborate scheme to make one of them think they'd won the lottery, only to reveal it was fake. The reactions were over the top, and the video had gone insanely viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. It was everything I wanted for myself. And that's when inspiration struck. I thought, if they can do it, why can't I? I didn't want to copy their prank exactly. I wanted to do something even bigger, something that would get people talking and sharing like crazy. After all, it was New Year's Eve. What better time to pull off a grand prank and start the year with a bang? I spent hours planning it, thinking about how I could make it work. I wanted it to be shocking, unforgettable, and most importantly, something that would make people laugh. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Deep down, though, I think I just wanted the attention. I wanted the likes, the shares, the comments. I wanted to go viral, no matter what it took. I decided I was going to plan a cheating prank. Yeah, I know, the dumbest idea ever, but at the time I thought it was genius. My goal was to make it as believable as possible, something so shocking and over the top that it would have everyone talking. I roped in a friend of mine to help. Let's call him Jake. Jake was super skeptical from the start. He kept saying, "Are you sure about this? This seems like it could go really wrong." Honestly, that should have been my red flag. If Jake, who is usually the chill, go-with-the-flow type, was uncomfortable with it, I should have stopped right there. But no, I didn't listen. I kept pushing him, saying it was all in good fun and that it would make for an amazing video. Eventually, after a lot of convincing, he reluctantly agreed. The plan was simple, or so I thought. My boyfriend Tom was coming back from a 3-day business trip that evening. I knew roughly what time he'd get home, assuming his flight wasn't delayed, so we planned everything around that. Jake came over that evening, and we set everything up. I made sure the camera was hidden and positioned to capture the perfect angle. Then, we staged the scene. We got into bed, stripped down, not completely, just enough to sell the illusion, and got under the sheets. The idea was to make it look like Tom was walking in on us in the middle of, well, you know. We waited until I heard his car pull into the driveway. I was so focused on how this was going to look on camera, how people were going to react when they saw the video. I didn't stop to think about what Tom's actual reaction might be. The second he walked through the door, Jake and I started making noises. Loud, exaggerated, ridiculous noises. I thought it was hilarious. Tom didn't. He came upstairs clearly hearing the sounds and burst into the bedroom. The look on his face when he saw us under the sheets, it wasn't confusion or even anger at first. It was pain, genuine, heart-wrenching pain. But that pain quickly turned into fury. Tom tore the sheets off us, and before I could even say a word, he was screaming. I burst out laughing because to me it was a joke, a prank. I kept saying, "It's a prank. Babe, it's just a prank." But he wasn't laughing, not even close. Jake, meanwhile, looked like he wanted to disappear. He kept mumbling, "It's a prank, man. It's not real." But Tom wasn't listening. Tom turned his attention back to me and told me to get out. He said he was done and couldn't take any more. He said he wanted me out of his house. Now. I froze. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. It was supposed to be funny. We were supposed to laugh about it afterward, maybe even get into a fake argument for the camera before I revealed the prank. This wasn't part of the plan. I tried to calm him down, to explain that it was all fake, but he wasn't having any of it. He said he didn't care, that it wasn't funny, that I was toxic and he wanted me gone. Jake, clearly uncomfortable and feeling like a third wheel in what had become a very real fight, mumbled an awkward apology and left. I didn't even stop him. I was too shocked to do anything but stand there, staring at Tom as he paced back and forth. We argued for what felt like hours. It wasn't even a back and forth kind of argument. He was firm and kept repeating the same thing over and over. I needed to leave. He didn't want me there. The more he said it, the more it sank in that he was serious, that this wasn't just an outburst he'd calmed down from. Eventually, I gave up. I packed a bag while crying like crazy, my hands shaking as I shoved clothes and random items into it. I couldn't believe it was happening. He called an Uber for me, which somehow made it even worse. It felt cold, like he couldn't even bear to drive me himself. I cried the entire ride to my parents' house. The driver didn't say anything, just glanced at me in the rearview mirror a couple of times with that awkward sympathy people give you when they don't know what to say. When I got to my parents' house, I was a mess. My face was red and blotchy, tears still falling as I dragged my bag up the driveway. They were immediately alarmed when they opened the door. Seeing their daughter show up unannounced, crying and carrying a bag, was obviously a huge shock. They brought me inside, sat me down, and tried to calm me down enough to explain what was going on. Once I could finally speak, I told them everything, about the prank, about how Tom had kicked me out, about how everything had gone horribly wrong. Their reaction was not what I wanted. They were angry, not at Tom, but at me. Disappointed would be putting it lightly. They asked me what I'd expected to happen. Did I really think that kind of prank would end well? Did I think humiliating someone I loved, someone I'd been with for years, was going to be funny? They didn't hold back, and honestly, they were right. The disappointment didn't stop there. Word of what happened spread fast, too fast. Some of my friends found out either from Tom or through the grapevine, and they didn't hesitate to let me know how they felt about it. Text after text came in, all saying the same thing. I was wrong. I'd crossed a line. Even Jake, who had been part of the prank, messaged me. He told me how uncomfortable the whole thing had been for him and said he didn't think I should post it at all. That was the breaking point for me. Like, excuse me? After everything I'd gone through, after my relationship imploded, after I humiliated myself, you're telling me not to post it? What was the point then? Why had I put myself through all this if I wasn't even going to get the content out of it? I suggested blurring his face, trying to find some middle ground, but deep down, I knew I couldn't post it. Too many people knew. Tom had already told me to delete every single video of him from my page. He didn't just want the prank video gone. He wanted everything. I cried and begged him to reconsider. I tried every angle, apologies, interventions, mutual friends, but he was done. He wouldn't budge. He made it clear that our relationship was over. A few days later, he had me come by to pack the rest of my stuff from his house. That was it. 5 years together, and it ended just like that. He didn't even leave room for a conversation. He cut me off completely, like flipping a switch. Blocked me on everything, no explanations, no closure. If that wasn't bad enough, my social media account got banned shortly after. The account I had poured all my time, effort, and energy into, gone. Just like that. I suspect someone reported it, maybe one of my ex-friends or even Tom. I don't know for sure, but the way it happened was so sudden and unexpected. One day I was scrolling through my posts trying to figure out what to do next, and the next, I couldn't log in. I was devastated. Everything crumbled so fast I could barely keep up. One moment I was planning a prank I thought would take my content to the next level, and the next, my relationship, my reputation, and my social media presence were all gone. It's honestly hard to process how quickly it all fell apart. I feel so stupid, all because I couldn't stop chasing views and validation from strangers on the internet. All because I didn't know when to stop, when to listen to the people around me who were telling me it was a bad idea. It was greed, plain and simple. 5 years together, and it all ended in the blink of an eye. It still doesn't feel real. It happened so fast, so violently. It gives me whiplash every time I think about it. 1 minute, I was planning pranks and thinking about content. The next, I'm single and alone. And now I have to start from scratch. I need a job. My days as a content creator are officially over. That chapter is closed, slammed shut, and honestly, I don't even know if I want to open it again. What's the point? It ruined my life. I'm back at square one, scrolling endlessly through job boards, trying to find something, anything, that will pay enough to let me survive. Living with my parents isn't exactly a long-term solution either. I love them, but they've made it pretty clear they're not going to let me freeload indefinitely. I can already feel the clock ticking before they start making those little comments about contributing to the household, or worse, charging me rent. I can't even blame them. I'm an adult. I should be able to stand on my own 2 feet, but right now, I can barely stand at all. And then there's the friends, or should I say, the lack of friends. It's like losing Tom meant losing half my social circle too. A lot of our friends I thought were our friends, sided with him. They didn't even try to hide their disappointment in me. It's not like I don't get it. I crossed a line. I screwed up, but it hurts more than I can put into words. I feel like an outcast in my own life. I can't even hang out with the few friends who haven't completely cut me off because they're all still connected to him. It would be awkward. Hell, they probably think I'm the villain in this whole situation, and maybe they're right. So I'm stuck at home most days, with nothing to do but scroll the internet looking for jobs, or just sit in bed staring at the ceiling. Some days I can't even muster the energy to get up. I feel useless, broken, and so incredibly stupid for letting my life spiral out of control like this. 5 years, 5 fucking years. It wasn't just a relationship. It was a life we were building together. We were already talking about marriage, about kids, about the future we wanted. It felt so solid, so real, and now it's gone, completely gone. All that time, all those plans, all that love, wiped out because I couldn't see past my own need for attention.
I cheated on my husband, and he spared no mercy in ruining my life. When I say he had spared no expense in ruining me, I mean it to the truth. My husband didn't even think twice about how this would tell on him or report on our family situation. It was like I had ceased to exist to him once he found out about my cheating mistake. I became nothing to him, and he proceeded to treat me like what I was. For someone that had been married to him for over 7 years, he had sure treated me like a stranger. This was something that could have been solved with therapy and the likes. I mean, we had been in love once upon a time and had been married. Don't you think with this, he should have at least tried to find out what had propelled me to have an affair outside our marriage? At least he owed that to me. I know you all will be sold on decorum on this platform, talk about, I owed it to him not to cheat and whatnot, but I'm on here to vent about my husband. Or rather, my ex-husband. He had wiped off my entire savings and taken the house he had gifted me on the day we had gotten married. The darn man hadn't stopped there. He had stripped me of all rights to have access to my son. Who cuts off all access of a mother to her son? My ex-husband, that's who. I had cheated, so what? We should have tried to fix it. I was ready to. I mean, who wakes up and decides to just cheat on their spouse? No one. There had to be a changing factor. And in my case, there had been. There had been a lot. I didn't just wake up one morning and decide to cheat on my husband of 7 years. There had been temptation, and from there several cobwebs, which I would get into definitely. So you all would get to understand it hadn't been totally my fault that I had an affair outside my marriage. Not that I'm seeking anyone's validation on this platform. My life has already been ruined. Ruined terribly, for that matter. You know, I keep on going to sleep and waking up and thinking this would all be a dream. That somehow I had vexed the god of nightmares and not my husband, and he had kept me in this endless loop of nightmares. I had nothing to my name because I had cheated. That was a terrible wake-up call, in my opinion. Retelling this experience just seemed to have a worse effect, by the way. An effect that is now my life because I had fallen for temptation. an effect I was now living because my husband decided to throw me and our darn long marriage to the wind. But in truth, it had all been my fault, no matter how hard I tried to delude myself. I had made the mistakes, more of, and I couldn't fault him for being done with me. I could have told him from the beginning and avoided this whole nightmare. I was a total blob and everything still felt surreal. Well, I'm beginning to get carried away with writing down my thoughts on the matter, without telling y'all how everything had come to play, and how my husband ruined my life. Like I said, the premier cause of the problem had been temptations, which led to a whole lot of cobwebs. These temptations came on as a result of problems my marriage had immediately when we marked our 7th wedding anniversary. Well, that most definitely had been a night to remember. It was the night my husband's ex-wife, first love, decided to waltz back into our lives. Like, you wouldn't believe the power of this woman. She just strolled in, and my husband began panting after her like a thirsty puppy. It was demeaning and downright downgrading, for crying out loud. 7 years, I had been married to this man for 7 years, and one look at his ex-wife, I began to feel small and had my doubts. Then, the downslide of problems began. You see, when I explained to y'all on here that it hadn't truly been my fault, I wasn't lying. After my husband's ex-wife showed, and yes, I knew he had been married before, and no, I didn't know what had caused them to separate. My husband never really talked about his ex-wife or his previous marriage, and he had been taking care of me, so of course I wasn't going to ask. Things went from good to terrible since she showed her face at the party. My husband began staying at the house less, always claiming one work trip or the other lol. There was no way he wasn't distancing himself from me. I thought to myself he had to be cheating on me with her. Wasn't it obvious? But I couldn't do anything about it because, unlike the independent women of today, I had been a housewife who had popped out a son and hosted parties for my husband and his friends. No, I wasn't living in a fairy tale, and I know this will sound too good to be true, but it was my life. My parties became her parties. She took ultimate control of the house. And do you guys want to know what my husband did when I confronted him about his little mistress? Nothing. My husband did absolutely nothing. Heck, if I hadn't spoken up, she would have started living with us. He then began arguing with me over every single thing. Obviously, we argued on occasion. There was no married couple that didn't. But ever since the little witch showed up, it was like I was in an invisible competition with her, and hence the arguing with my husband. What would he prefer to have for dinner? Argue. Was he going on a trip by the weekend? Argue. It became a strain to talk to him, so one day I exploded up on him. I told him exactly what I thought of him and his little witch, and how I knew he was probably cheating on me with her. Because what other reason could she have been back into our lives for? Redditors, you needed to have seen the way my husband combusted on me. It was like I had set off the fireworks and the comparisons began. At the end of the fight, my husband told me if I wasn't satisfied with the way he was treating me with all the money and the houses and the luxury gifts, I shouldn't let the door hit me on the way out. My husband of 7 years, someone I had fallen in love with against all advice, had said that to me. I had literally gone against all warnings because of love and married him. And since I had no one he thought he could say to me. Let me give you all a little introduction on how my husband and I met. My name is Laurel, and I'm 33 years old. My husband's name is Mark, and he's 40 years old. My husband, or should I say my ex-husband? Well, I'll call him my husband till I get to the part of our divorce. My husband owned a law firm, a successful one at that, and I had met him when I had been posted there for my internship. No, I didn't study law. I had studied international relations, but my mother had wanted me to study law, so she dumped me in a law firm as punishment. You know how mothers can be. I wasn't even where the real stuff happened. I had been stuck with the solicitors back then, but I remember I met my husband when he had thrown a workers' retreat. I had badmouthed him in front of everyone, not knowing he was the owner of the law firm, and as a way to make it up to him, I became his coffee fetcher. Cliché, right? Same thing my friends had said. We had started dating a year later after my internship had ended. Luckily, I wasn't employed in the company once I was done with college unless it would have been an office scandal. As it then, I hadn't known my husband had been married before. I got to find out with the whole of my family when he took us out for dinner and we bumped into her in a restaurant. I mean, how small could the whole of Connecticut be that we had to have ran into her there? The tension at the restaurant that evening had been so thick that even a chainsaw couldn't cut it. Apparently, as I had come to learn, they had only been married for a year and had split for reasons my husband hadn't deemed fit to tell me about. The reasons had to have been something serious because there had been a lot of side eyes and unbridled words. Once my folks had found out that he had been married before, they were strictly against the marriage. In their words, if he couldn't take care of his former wife, then he couldn't take care of me, and I was better off finding someone closer to my age. And I hadn't taken their word of warning. My parents had me cut off because I went ahead with the relationship. After a year of dating, my husband proposed, and true to their words, my parents hadn't shown up for my wedding. I could still remember the shock of not seeing them at my wedding. I had sent them invitations and had kept my fingers crossed for a miracle. But I walked down the aisle by myself with only my friends from college to clap for me. I had done all that because I had loved him. I had gone against my parents' wishes to marry this man, and after 7 years here, he was calmly telling me I could use the door if I didn't like that his ex-wife was back in his life. Can you imagine the dimwit? Why wouldn't I have cheated back? Well, I didn't leave, of course. I didn't leave because he was right. He provided for me the money, the luxury, and the gifts. I couldn't leave him, and I couldn't have left my son either, so I had stayed put. I was frustrated and desperately needed someone to talk to. So when that person came by, I took the opportunity, not knowing I was setting up a landslide for myself. My husband's partner in his law firm, Gary. At first, it was just a simple case of him asking how I was doing and if there was anything he could do to assist me. He had been so kind, so I found myself drifting more and more to him as my husband drifted away from me. My husband could be gone for more than 2 weeks on a business trip. I had wondered what kind of case could make a lawyer be gone for almost a month. I mean, he always had his cases at home base. But ever since the witch had magically appeared, my husband disappeared on various occasions. Funny occasions. And as a woman, I had needs. I needed someone to talk to. My son was barely 4 and still speaking in toddler talk. Like I had said, I hardly had any friends. My husband had been all I had. And a girl had needs, which was then coupled with the loneliness of hardly seeing my husband. The few occasions he came back, it was like I had become invisible. He preferred sleeping in one of the guest rooms rather than to be near my space. He was out like the speed of lightning before daylight cracks, and only came back when it was past midnight. The signs had just been too numerous for me not to jump into conclusions, but instead of calling him out again and have him throw me out for good this time, I turned to his friend, who seemed to be always there to listen. I turned to his friend the first time out of curiosity because I wanted to know what my husband's ex-wife had over my husband. I wanted to know the spell the witch had over my husband. So I had gone and asked my husband's best friend and partner. This was when I found out that my husband's ex-wife was also a partner in their law firm. So it was the 3 of them that ran the firm. No wonder she had such control over him. He needed her. But where had she been for the past 7 years? Why the heck did she think she could waltz in and try to test my marriage? And that foolish man I had married didn't want to do anything about it. This was where my husband's friend stepped in, and I'm sure you all can guess the rest. It started with simple trips to his house to get advice on what I should do about my husband and why I was suddenly invisible to him. Then it progressed to me talking about everything and anything with him and cooking for him. From there, that's how I landed in between the sheets with him. Yep, that's how I started sleeping with my husband's best friend and partner. Like I said earlier, I can't be fully blamed for it. I wasn't getting any attention from my husband's end, and I found where to get the attention. And my willpower crumpled like a crushed flower. Right under my nose, the thing with my husband's best friend and partner turned into an affair, and I couldn't stop. I didn't want to, quite frankly. While my husband was busy going on trips with his ex-wife or whomever, I was warming his best friend's bed with my son in daycare. Life was perfect for me. For a while, I thought I had everything panned out. My husband would never find out, and I could end this thing with his best friend when I wanted to. I was wrong on both counts. Totally wrong. My husband found out. I wondered how it had been like when he found out. His best friend had been the one to break the news to him when I couldn't succumb to his blackmail. Yes, my husband's best friend blackmailed me. I told you all it would only get worse from the moment I decided to cheat on my husband. This was how my perfect life with my affair took a turn. A month after hiding and enjoying an affair with my husband's best friend behind his back, my husband came back and started liking my company again. He even sought me out on all occasions, and the problem with his ex-wife wasn't a problem anymore. It was as if there was a transformation on the last trip he had traveled for, and I began feeling guilty. I had my family back again. I couldn't continue having an affair outside my marriage. It wouldn't bode well for me. So I decided to end the affair. In my head, I had thought it was going to be as simple as just saying it. It had been a phase, and I needed to end it. It was meant to be as simple as that. I had never been more wrong in my life. The man I had once found comfort in turned out to be a nightmare. Literally, you all. He had recorded pictures of our affair that was supposed to be hidden behind closed doors. And when I had gone to end the affair, he had thrown said pictures in my face and told me he was ready to lose the friendship with my husband, but in his own words, was I ready to lose my marriage with my husband? The car that was my life now started its journey downward on the slope of disasters. Yes, this was how my husband's best friend began blackmailing me. It started with little things like a copy of deeds, which I had no idea what he needed to use that for. I mean, I could sacrifice a couple of papers over me losing my marriage. Even though I wasn't in it for love anymore, I wouldn't even have nowhere to start to cater for myself and my child if my husband kicked me out. I didn't know how soon my fear would come to pass. From a couple of papers to keys to some drawers, the tasks to buy my husband's best friend's silence over our affair became harder by the day. The evil man wanted the firm for himself. That's what I had found out, and I couldn't keep giving him easy access to all the hard work and sweat my husband had put in to raise his company. That's when my husband's best friend became my nightmare. The threats tripled from just telling my husband about our affair, but forwarding it to their clients to diminish my husband's reputation to making threats on my son. I had to give him what he wanted. The fear of losing my marriage had conquered all the fear of my husband losing the ownership rights of his firm. Once again, I had never been so wrong and foolish in my life. I made another foolish mistake. I handed him another important document. How had I known I had made a foolish mistake? It came to slap me back in the face when my husband came back from work one day and threw papers of my affair right in my face. Like, how had I been so foolish to not see that coming? I had trusted the devil. I had trusted him to hide a lie when he was the father of lies. The time after my husband threw the pictures in my face had been a blur because he hadn't confronted me yet. He had just left me in the house and hadn't come home not even once. I hadn't known what had been happening in his head or what he was planning to do to me. I just had this dreadful feeling in my head that I was definitely done for, so I decided to start planning how I would sell most of the things he had gotten for me. My eyes had been on the condo he had gotten for me when I had given birth to my son. I could sell that and use the money to move to another city and start a new life for me and my son. I didn't know my husband's plans were going to disrupt mine totally. The fruition of my husband's plans began when he stumbled angrily into the house one evening and flung divorce papers in my face and carried my son out of the house. You remember that downward slope I had said my car, which was my life, was on? Yeah, at this point it had crashed and was tumbling in a non-stop motion. The thing I had feared the most was laughing me in the face while dancing the mamba around me. I deserved it, you all don't need to tell me, but I still had a plan. That's what I had thought. When I went to sell the house, my husband had gotten me to be able to run away once I signed the papers. I was told the house wasn't under my name. I had shown the realtor the deeds in my name, and I was told that wasn't the correct documents to the house. That the document in my hand only showed I had purchased a space in a storage unit. You can't even begin to imagine how stupid I had felt at that moment. I had been played by my husband. Like, why would he lie to me about a house if he hadn't bought me one? It had all been in the plan to ruin my life. I hadn't known then. In my head, it was just a cruel taste of fate. After the property fiasco, I had to pawn off my rings and bracelets my husband had gotten me as a show of love. I put that in quotes because after giving me a fake property for giving birth to his son, I don't think my husband understood the meaning of love. Well, I was in the middle of looking for jewelry to sell when I remembered that he had opened up a bank account for me that he had said he would be for me. I had that as my last resort because I hadn't been saving much in our marriage. He provided everything I wanted, so I hadn't seen the need to save. I regret that now. Well, I shouldn't have put much hope in the account because just like the fake property, the account was empty. Can you imagine the gall of this man? After staying with him for 7 years, he was treating me like this because I had a little affair. It wasn't even as if he was innocent in retrospect. So I went to confront him because I wasn't going to go out of this marriage office without anything. I found him at his office, and of course, the witch that had started this whole problem was there with him. And I told her explicitly what I thought of her. That she was a marriage wrecker who, instead of respecting her old age, was behaving like a prostitute and panting after a married man. Well, that didn't bode well for me because my husband threw me out of his office when I hadn't even delivered the message I had come to say to him. It didn't stop me, though. I came again the next day and the day after until I became a nuisance in his workplace, and he had no choice but to give me an audience. Then I told him everything I thought of him and his cheap timing behind, and my husband told me what he thought of me. Apparently the house had been real, but he had switched the papers and bought the house for himself since he had a 1/3 commanding interest in the house. And my savings, he had cleared that because he also owned the account. That day my husband swore he was going to wreck my life like I had wrecked his. It was on this day that I found out that my husband was fighting for ownership of his firm with his best friend in court. I had contributed to the problem. I signed the divorce papers on that day in shame, with the hope that at least he would forgive me, and I could start from scratch again. I knew there was no way I was going to get custody of my son. I didn't even want to try. Do you guys think I did the right thing? Update 2, Hi Redditors. I'm back with an update on what happened with my life after I divorced my husband. Apparently my husband wasn't done with me. Nope, I wasn't nowhere done paying for my sins with my husband and his best friend. After I had divorced my husband and receded all rights of custody of my son, I had tried to pick up my life, but of course that had been hard without a dime to my name. My parents had decided to cut me off ever since I had married my ex-husband, and even as I became free from the marriage, they still wanted nothing to do with me. Well, my friends were a close-knit bunch that agreed with what my parents said, so I didn't have any help from them. I had to go back to being a barista. I began living from hand to mouth. I had nowhere to stay. You'll think with all these terrible things happening to me, I would have learnt my lesson. No, I hadn't. 6 months after I had divorced my husband, and 6 months of working like an elephant and eating like an ant, someone walked into the cafe where I was working. Your first guess would surely be my ex-husband's best friend. But no, that wasn't who graced my cafe with their presence. It was my ex-husband's ex-wife. According to her, she had been watching me for some time and was saddened by how things were going horrible for me. Yeah, the witch just came to laugh in my face. She said she had a job for me and asked if I had any qualms with working with my ex-husband again. I was about to say no. There was no way I was going to be working with my ex-husband again. Then I heard the salary amount for the job, and I was humbled. That was 5 times my monthly income as a barista in just 1 month. I didn't waste any time in accepting not knowing I was setting myself up for another run. Well, I found out the hard way. I began working for my ex-husband's ex-wife as her personal assistant. Who would have thought I would be this deeply involved in drama after the one I just got out from? I'm sure you guys didn't see this coming. It was like I was living a dream. Scratch that, I was living in a nightmare. Like, has anyone ever experienced this level of drama in their lives, or am I the only one that's always singled out for bad things? There was no way the life I was living was normal or real or true in any way. No matter how hard I wished it was a dream, this was my reality. During the beginning weeks, things hadn't been weird at all. I didn't even get to see my ex-husband, but things began to get weird and suspicious, and I was in the middle of it once more. My ex-husband's ex-wife, my boss more of, had an imitator in her office most of the time whenever I went there to submit a document she asked for. The lawyers supposed to defend the law and have a clean slate free of crime were the ones doing the most evil things. I didn't know what she'd been using the imitator for. In fact, how I had found out she had been using an imitator was when she told me to go and drop off the document I had gotten from my ex-husband's personal secretary. I had viewed the document and found that something was off about it. No one would notice except someone with a keen eye, and I had lived with my ex-husband for 7 years, so I knew exactly how he signed his signatures. I knew something was off. Yep, something was really off, and it started to unveil itself when I found my ex-husband's best friend in a meeting with my boss, his ex-wife. That's when I knew that something was going on, and it was going to be against my husband. But I couldn't do anything about it. I was an employee of his ex-wife, and he had cut me out of his life. My only hope was that my child was safe and not involved in whatever they had planned. They began to let me in on their plans, scratch that. They began to slip with their plans in front of me when my boss ordered me to make copies of a CAFO of a house. You all would never guess what just landed in my lap. My boss had just told me to go make copies of the rights to the ownership of my house. The house my husband had allegedly bought for me, but bought back for himself in his attempt to ruin me. Like, can you imagine my stroke of luck? What was she doing with it? It was none of my business, so I just did my job and made copies of the papers like she had told me to. But the feeling of holding what had rightfully been the papers to my property in my hand, after I had let it slip from my fingers, that had stung. I was sure that was what my boss had wanted to accomplish. She wanted me to know how it felt, not having something to call my own. After that incident, it seemed their plans started working for them because my ex-husband came back from his trip and began searching his whole office for important documents. I had heard that he had thrown a tantrum when he couldn't find whatever he was looking for. Apparently, he hadn't known I was now working for his ex-wife, and I didn't run into him. You want to know when things became truly suspicious and horrible for me? I mean, it was like I couldn't have a single moment of peace ever since I had cheated. Well, my husband's ex-wife came to me and gave me a large amount of cash and told me I could take 2 weeks off. In her own words, I deserved it. This was someone I just started working for a month ago. I should have known I was being set up. I had no clue until it all unfolded before my eyes. I took her money and went to rent a room and just rest from all the hassle I had been through. Yeah, then the police and my ex-husband came knocking. I had no idea how they had found out where I lived, but they barged in and started rapping in Spanish to my ears. There was talk of forgery and theft, and it was at the point they pulled the house papers with my signature on it that I knew I had been set up. Everything I said from that moment fell on deaf ears as I was whisked to the police station. I couldn't believe what was happening. This charge was going to be a dent to my name officially. When someone pulled up my records, they were going to see a criminal record. This charge was going to make it hard for me to get my son. Those had been the only thoughts in my head when the police read my rights and told me I had access to a state lawyer to defend my cause since I didn't have one. I couldn't afford one because I had been given counterfeit cash. This was another charge on my head because I wasn't supposed to be in possession of counterfeit bills. I tried. I tried so very hard to explain that I had been a pawn that had been set up. However, my ex-husband's ear was closed to my pleas. According to him, I had come back to try to take everything once again, and I could never be trusted. This was how I was whisked away to prison. Yep, folks, I was found guilty for forgery and theft and was sentenced to prison for 10 years. I wasn't going to see my son for 10 years. My life was completely and utterly ruined. And it was still ruined, but luckily I didn't get to go to prison for 10 years. How would I be here typing this update a year later if I had gone to prison? Well, my case was reviewed 2 months later when everything was uncovered that it had been my ex-husband's ex-wife and his best friend's plan to use me as a cover front for their much bigger fraud. They didn't get away with it, though. Yeah, that's how I was released. Apparently, they had made me sign the paper without my knowledge. Yes, my signature hadn't been forged. That's why the court had found me guilty in the first place. However, they just wanted my ex-husband to be focused on my case while they sold the firm to the rival firm and disappeared with the money. They also forged my ex-husband's signature to gain access to his accounts. That's when they were found. And I was released after going through the worst 2 months of my life. I had contemplated dying because it was difficult on those nights when I thought about what I would do with my life after 10 years of rotting in prison. What I had gone there is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy because I had seen what my eyes couldn't imagine. I'm sure you're wondering if my husband apologized to me after the whole fiasco was over. He didn't. In his own words, I had deserved everything that was happening to me. According to him, maybe sometime I would get to have some common sense to know not to trust easily. Yeah, I had learned my lesson big time. Trying to get a job with my criminal record was hard and sometimes warranted in insults from employers. I couldn't get to see my child too because my ex-husband was threatening heaven and hell if I ever came near them. So I was stuck once more, living from hand to mouth until I gained the courage to face my parents again. Lol, it didn't go well, but at least I got a roof over my head and occasional food while I figured out the next step of my life. My mom was the one pressuring me to do more than wait on people and serve them coffee. That I should do something useful with my degree, that's why they had put me through school. I get that she was trying to be helpful, and it was in her nature, but I was trying. I woke up trying and went to sleep trying. This was something that wouldn't leave my mind, even in my second lifetime. Yep, I was stuck with the memory of never getting to see my son. And nothing I could do would rewind the clock to stop me from making the horrible decision of having an affair with my husband's best friend. I hope you all have learned a thing or two from my experience in trusting people and hurting those you claim to love. I had caused my problem myself when I had cheated on my husband as an effort to curb my loneliness. It had been stupid, and I will continue facing the consequences of my actions by not getting to watch my child grow up. That's one thing I was going to miss, and it pains me to the depths of my soul. I hope one day my ex-husband gets to allow me back into my child's life. As for you folks, I hope you guys get to learn not to trust just anyone, even if it's your closest pal, because they can turn around to bring about your downfall, and family always has your back, no matter if they cut you off for eternity. They would have your back still. This doesn't mean you should ever succumb to having an affair outside your marriage. You would learn the hard way like I did. I'm still trying to pick up my life after I was left with nothing, and it's been hard every step of the way. But I'm thinking, I'll move to a new city and start life over again. Maybe see if with a new place there will be new opportunities. Well, I hope you have a good life, Redditors, and stay away from trouble. Bye.